Hi, alchemists, and welcome back to another episode of Elemental Educator. I'm your host, Tyler, and if you're joining us for the first time, thank you so very much for tuning in, and welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Elemental Educator on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from, and check out our website, elementaleducator.com. Today, we're joined by Dr. Jody Carrington, a global leader in human connection. I can't wait to dive into this episode with Jody where we unpack the power of connection. So get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Como.
Hello and welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we have a guest ready to inspire. Today, I'm thrilled to have Dr. Jody Carrington with us, a true powerhouse in the world of human connection and mental health. Dr. Carrington's work is a direction of hope in our increasingly disconnected world, and her authentic, energetic approach has inspired countless individuals to rediscover the good within themselves and their communities. We're excited to dive into her work, insights, and explore how we can all work towards reconnecting in a meaningful way. Welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast, Dr. Carrington. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, Tyler, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about your work. Let's dive in.
Absolutely. Now, I always ask this whenever I have a doctor on the show because I don't know, maybe it's a thing of respect, or do you want Dr. Carrington? Do you want Jody? Do you want Dr. Jody Carrington?
Yeah, I really prefer like queen or just like goddess, something like that would be good today. That's what I'm feeling.
Empress? Empress is right.
Oh, yeah. I feel like that's super regal, but sure, I'll take it. Yeah, no, I don't. Jody's just fine. Thank you, Tyler.
All right, Jody. This is a big first question, but it's one of my favorite ones to ask. How did you get to where you are now?
Let me say, I think, so here's interesting, or what's interesting to me, right? You're in Alberta in this moment, and I grew up in a little town called Viking, Alberta, Canada, and K-12 school. I often talk about this. I knew the first and last name of every teacher I had, but I didn't think, I was a huge fan of sports. And when I left our little town, I was inspired by a teacher, not because of her skills of teaching literacy and numeracy, but the way that she made her students feel. And particularly in times of big distress. She was the one who had to tell us our 16-year-old captain of our hockey team that year had been killed. She was the one that sort of walked us home through all of the things. She was our graduation coordinator. She was like the whole thing. And I just remember thinking, I want to make people feel the way she made us feel. And so when I left there, just like in anybody's career, it's a series of mess ups and repairing mistakes. And I also started in a very privileged position. I'm cisgendered, I'm white, I'm able-bodied, I have all of those things. And none of those things I realized until much later, but I had just such a great opportunity. I worked as a civilian member for the RCMP for a couple of years. I was a house mother in Ronald McDonald House for a couple of years and just really wanted to, a victim services advocate, I really wanted to get a sense of what it was like when organizations didn't look after their people, what is trauma due to a system. And I did my residency in Nova Scotia. And at that point, I had done all of my work with adults. Right? Adults and systems and police officers and sports. And I loved that take on things. And then I had to do a rotation with kids when I did my residency. And I wasn't a fan, but I realized we knew less about kids and trauma than we knew about adults and trauma. So I did have a postdoc in child psychiatry. And my first job was back in Alberta at the Alberta Children's Hospital, which is our center of excellence, that in the Stollery, on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit for kids. So for 10 years, almost 10 years, I spent a lot of time with the hitters and the kickers and the biters and the ones to tell you to fuck off. I love those babies because we ask still to this day the wrong questions. We always ask what is wrong with this kid. We try to find the motivators and the triggers to keep them quiet, not calm. And I learned so quickly from those families, not the 13 years post-secondary education, but from those kids and families, that when you start asking this question, what happened to this one? Not what's wrong with this one. you suddenly find an empathy in your work, a passion in your work that will defy any aspect of burnout. And so that started this whole belief for me that there's a mission to have conversations about how we treat kids and people and marginalized peoples. And I landed myself a husband. He's a farmer. I tried to get a hockey player a number of times. It was brutal and impossible. So then I had to settle for a farmer, which is very fine. He's a nice guy. And we were old. We both had our PhDs. And so we had our first baby, and right away we were pregnant again. And it was twins. And so we had 3 littles under 2. And so we moved to the town where Aaron grew up, my husband, and I started a private practice and coaching hockey. And then because I had almost a decade at the Children's Hospital, there was so much about our small rural communities where there was consultations around really dysregulated kids that I loved. And so I was jumping into schools, speaking to educators and administrators about how we switched the question from what's wrong to what happened. And then that became a book. And that was a national bestseller. And then now I have 2 more books, and I speak globally.
And all of that at the ripe age of 29. Hey, that's just
oh my God, it's shocking, really. It's shocking how it's going backwards. Yeah.
One thing about Viking is that we could never beat their volleyball teams. So you're spot on with the athletics. They know how to sport over there, and they do it
really
well. Yep, they're doing something really well over there.
I'm 5 foot frigal in real life, so I wasn't part of a volleyball legacy. So grad 93, we weren't solid, but post that, I'm sure it sounds like we did some better things.
You know, what an incredible story to unpack the why. You say what happened, I say why is this happening, and unpacking the why behind everything, which resonates a lot with our first point here, Jody, on the element of earth, which really represents the core values in rooting yourself in beliefs. And so how did you have your core values shape your journey as a psychologist and speaker, especially in your mission to reconnect people in this disconnected world?
I always knew I had big fans. And what I mean by that is we were never meant to do any of this alone. And I am still lucky enough to have the most incredible set of parents. And not that we haven't been through our shit, but I knew that no matter what, I always could come home. And I have never underestimated the power of that, the sense of grounding that is so represented in the element of earth, because we will all spin. We will all get dysregulated. That the chaos is necessary to learn the calm. The healthiest among us have somewhere to land when it gets too much. And I attribute, it's a privilege to be in this position, obviously, but I think it's been a constant effort to be surrounded by regulated people. And I've been so lucky to have always really big fans in my life, and now certainly on my team. My husband is amazing. And I think that I can't do much of what we do is really non-traditional for women. I'm the CEO of my own company. I've written 3 books. We travel around the world. We're raising our 3 babies together. And he's the most insightful. In one generation, we've made a massive leap from our small town dads and the expectations of our small town moms, both Aaron's mom and mine. And so I think it's just, you can't do anything alone. And so I really just think that grounding is so necessary.
Absolutely. And speaking of your company, how do you ensure that core belief is operationalized in everything that you do?
I think that in Feeling Seen, I write a lot about acknowledgement. And I think that the agency of people really understanding that it's not about how much you achieve, it's who you achieve it with, is so important. And we've been really, I think, stuck in this place of like, work hard, hustle hard. Really, it's a badge of honor if you can pull an all-nighter, if you can. And I did this early in my career for sure, which is a bit of a rite of passage. When you're learning something, I stayed up late to write reports. I'd go back to the hospital to put kids to bed. I'd read and over prep and all those kind of things. But I think that when we just do things for the accolades, we lose our ability to find that passion really quick. And so I would do probably any job on this earth. And as long as I am with a team or the right people, nothing is impossible. And I think we really underestimate that. We come from a generation, probably me more than you, where there is the rhetoric of the work-life balance, which is asinine. There is no work-life balance. The 40-hour work week is asinine. Your students, their families, your administrators have never had this much access to you. And to expect that when you leave the school, you are going to be able to shut it off is ridiculous. And so when we start to embrace that and realize that's why many of us are so tired, because we don't get a break. And we can say we're not checking our emails. We can say we're all on social media, generally speaking. And that's a very sweeping statement, but 99.98% of people have access to some social media platform. And so most of us, that's how we communicate with our administrators or the parents of the kids we serve, even the students that we serve. And there's no break. When your dad or my dad came through the door at 5 o'clock, nobody could get them. They could call the house phone, but you would choose deliberately not to answer that. Now, our watches are dinging, our emails are dinging, our phones are getting texts, everything is happening. And every time you get a shot of cortisol, it changes the way your body responds to the world, which makes it then very difficult to rest and to sleep. And if you know this very clearly, if you've ever seen a toddler miss a nap, they're assholery-ish. The greatest predictor of wellness is sleep. And the kids we serve have never been this sleep deprived in the history of education than they are in this moment.
Absolutely. And you know what, to add to that as well, it's even in contracts, and they're giving work phones, and now it's becoming expectations through almost anywhere where you're signing an agreement to take on some form of leadership role that you are available when needed. And that's a tricky thing. It's no longer work-life balance. It's work-life management, and it's figuring out the organization behind it all. Now, what you're talking about, the idea of collaborative mindsets and working together and being there as a team, it resonates with me, the idea of the reptilian brain and getting past that idea of flight and training the brain that you're creating a safe environment so that you can then process and start to work together to achieve something. For people that are trying to create what you have, that area of collaboration, that area of safety, what would you recommend people start with in trying to create that space?
It starts with you. You are not that good to fix multiple generations of abuse, neglect, trauma in your students. You are not that good to influence the government for the rest of your career. You are not that good to be able to make people act the way you want them to act on your staff teams. The one you have the most control over, right? And we tend to bitch about everything else, right? Like it's this, which I understand, right? And many of those complaints are legitimate complaints in this season. What I think we forget often is grounding in our own bodies, right? Being able to drop our shoulders. Like even as you're listening to this right now, if you're driving or running or whatever's happening, just really notice where your body's at. And we spend a lot of time with our shoulders up. And so I often say to people, I want you to ground back into you, because that's where the access to the best parts of you live, right? Burnout you can't burn out from something that you didn't once love. So it's not like that we've lost our capacity to be great or passionate. Many of us have lost access to it. And it's just like a kid who gets emotionally dysregulated. They don't lose their ability to be kind and use their words or use their strategies. They lose access to it. That's the reptilian brain. You get deep into fight, flight, or freeze. And what we often misunderstand is you can't punish somebody back into their prefrontal cortex. You've got to walk them there. And it's similar to us as colleagues. You cannot ignore somebody enough, tell them they're a piece of shit enough, roll your eyes enough at a meeting to affect change the same way you will when you lean into somebody, when you drop your shoulders and get back to the best parts of you. It doesn't mean you tolerate bullshit. It means you are kind first, you seek first to understand, and then you set the limits in that order.
A little hint of the 7 habits there. That's a good way to segue it too. And absolutely right. Showing authenticity in what you're doing and being there for people, showing up. The brain is very smart. It doesn't matter whose brain it is. It's smart, and it recognizes when it's in a safe space or a not safe space. And that's the way to move forward with it. It is imperative that people root themselves in their earth and in their core values, because it helps them encounter everything else and make these decisions, which along the way, Jody, that brings us to AIR, which symbolizes that need to overcome adversity and challenges people face. Because in leadership roles, in any role, you do face a lot of adversity. Can you share a significant challenge that you faced in your career and how you found that way to overcome it?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes intention and perception become the heart of everything that we do in relationship, whether the people we serve or the people we live with, the people we're married to. Our intentions, although sometimes are very good, is not how it's perceived by another. And I think the hardest times in my career is when there's been a mismatch in an intention and a perception. So when anybody's ever questioned my character, or if they would think that I would intentionally have intended to say something that was hurtful or do something that was hurtful, right? And question the character without understanding the context. And I think it's probably been one of the biggest lessons of my career where, your ability to be clear on what you believe to be true, your ability to be clear here first, and then the capacity to communicate that is the only thing you have control over. And getting back there again and again and again. And I've learned that lesson the hard way, right? Even when it comes specifically to documenting things, if you have to do that in this digital world, being very clear about, here's my intention, this is how it started. The perception, I understand, could be remarkably different. But when we're rooted here, it changes everything.
Absolutely. And on top of that, your work with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and in the psychiatric unit for kids, that involves a lot of intense experiences around trauma, around adversity everyone's facing. How were you able to manage and maintain your empathy, but also yourself in that challenging environment?
I say this to educators all the time, and this is hard because we have empathy for, care very deeply for the people that we serve. That's where I think you get very effective in your job. I am also very clear at the same time that this is a job, and the people who I go home to matter most. So if I'm not okay, the people I serve don't stand a chance. And very early in my career, it took me a long time to learn this lesson, right? So if I am going to be at my best to hang on to horrific stories, right, of death and loss and grief and unjust behaviors and all kinds of adversity, if I'm not okay, the people I serve don't stand a chance. So if I've taken an oath, if my obligation in this role, in this title that I hold as a psychologist, I need to be clear that my work has to be done first. And sometimes that happens every day. Sometimes that has to go minute to minute. And how do we get into this place of knowing that that place of regulation is where your good will live? And I think that's probably the most important piece.
And when we talk about the salience of stakeholders and the people that you work with, you have to remember that yourself is also a stakeholder, and your level of urgency is just as important as the level of urgency of the people that you serve. And there's a big difference between servant leaders and transformational and adaptive leaders. Servant leaders are going to burn out very fast because they're not too focused on looking after themselves as much as they are providing for everyone around them. And on top of all of that, your keynote speeches, you often talk about living in that disconnected world. And sometimes servant leadership can lead us to that disconnected world a bit. What strategies do you recommend for individuals and organizations to overcome those feelings of isolation and burnout?
Here's the thing, right? Leadership is lonely. And this has long been the sentiment, right? It's lonely at the top, heavy as the head, all of those kind of things. And I think there's some expectation where if we look historically at leaders who have done this, this is not new. Right? Like decisions have to be made. Otherwise, people who you're leading feel really unsafe. Because if there's a lot of, I don't know, or shit all falls apart and they're like, ah! So there is this sense, right, that at the end of the day, you're taking the responsibility to gather enough information to be able to move an organization, a group of people forward to the best of your capacity. Again, I think what is really critical in that piece is that if you haven't done your own reflection, your own stillness in the run of a day, that will be significantly compromised, right? And the expectation is that sometimes it will be because we're human. We're going to mess it up sometimes. That word grace, I think, becomes really important. I do think the greatest investment, and oftentimes, particularly in education or when we move up from doing the job to then leading the people doing those jobs, we tend to be good with kids. Not necessarily good with big people. Those are two very different skill sets. So because you are a good teacher does not mean you're going to be a good leader. And so making that transition becomes really critically important because your job as a leader, a principal, a vice principal, any administrator is no longer kids first. And this is shocking when we start to really dig deep into effective leadership. If you have 6 kids lined up and 2 staff, you better be taking your staff every time. If there's somebody's like bleeding, fine. Okay. But honestly, the point is empower your group of leaders first, your team, so that together you can serve these babies. If you continue to usurp that because it's, I call the principal, bring him in here, get the VP, and you're trying your best to like, come here, I got it. Okay, I got it. Like I struggle every time I walk into a school when I see the principal or the vice principal walking through the hallways like Mother Goose, huh? They're collecting all the dysregulated humans because they want to protect their staff. That is disarming their capacity. Now, maybe are you better at that? And in any given moment, your capacity to do that is critical. How are you collecting your staff so that they can then have a plan for those dysregulated babies so that you don't have to save them, line them up in your office with iPads or snacks? How do we empower our people to be able to do that effectively? And I often say this, the most dysregulated kids in a school are not surprises. What's the plan? So if I know Miss S has 3 IPPs, and I know if you pool your staff, if we think about even particularly in the smaller schools, the ones who are going to need the biggest parts of our souls are not surprises. If I pooled your staff, I got the bus drivers and the EAs and the custodians together, and I'd be like, all right, who are the top 5 babies we're worried about this year? There is a massive amount of reliability and validity in that assessment. Because nobody's going to be like, I really am worried about Emma. And people are like, who the shit's Emma? Somebody's going to say, okay, Jackson with an X. And everybody, it's just, right? So what do we know as a team about those top 3 or those top 5 that then equips the custodian and the bus driver and the administrator so that when it all goes to shit, we're not just waiting for that one person. Oh gosh, what do we do? His EA is not here today. Oh goodness, what do we do? Mr. Tyler's busy. Oh, don't leave your staff that unprepared. Encourage that sense of we're just walking each other home. That's my favorite quote. If you've ever heard me speak before, my favorite quote of all time is a Ram Dass quote that says, we are all just here walking each other home. And why I spend the vast majority of my time with educators in my career is because I think they are some of the most profound walkers of all time. Of the most important investment in this earth is the next generation of humans. And if we can effectively walk them through big things like bullying and being assholes and learning how to not send dick pics, it is our job to walk them through that because they won't just learn those things. And the shitty part about it is we're the first generation of parents and leaders with access to social media. We're not sure. They're better at it. And we're like, we don't know. Should we be talking about Pornhub? Yes! Because we overprotect our kids in person and we underprotect them online. That's John Haidt's work. And so it becomes so critically important that we find as a staff the capacity to see that our job isn't to avoid dysregulation. It is to have a plan for when it happens.
There's so much to unpack in that. And one of the first things that jumps out to me is you're absolutely spot on when you talk about you need to deal with and not deal with, you need to support the teacher first, because when you are supporting the teacher first, you are actually supporting the kids because that teacher is going back and touching the lives of every kid they see. Whereas if you support the kid first, you're supporting one kid. You need to support the person that's working ubiquitously in your school. Yeah. You need to support that person holistically as well. And bringing up the idea of empowerment here, it's so crucial. I tell teachers all the time, in my school, out of my school, I can help you with this. I can do this for you. But if I do, I take your power away.
Right. Amen.
And how much power do you want? Right? Do you want, if you want a scenario where every single time something goes wrong, they say to your face, oh, I'm just going to the person above you.
Right.
You can choose that path. That's fine. But you're the professional. And if you want to sit there and you want to solve the problem and you want to feel empowered and you want control, I tell you right now, if you do that, you will have less behavior in your class. You will have deeper levels of learning. You will have higher parent engagement that are willing to support you in your classroom with your kids as well.
Amen. Want to know why? Because you're not that good.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot single-handedly regulate every baby. You cannot single-handedly attend to every parent complaint. You are not the hero. What I need you to do is empower the next group of people who you want to do your job even better than you. And you can't tell people how to do that. You have to show them. They have to see you have a disagreement in a staff meeting. They have to see you walk somebody home. They have to see you navigate walking the hallways, figuring out how to regulate kids or other staff in front of everybody else. And I think here's one of the key things I think about often, Tyler, is when I visit schools, I can tell you one of the greatest predictors of the healthiest among you is when I can hear laughter in the hallways. Because amongst staff, the kids, irrelevant, but the most vulnerable emotion on the planet is joy. And kids, their neurophysiology will calm in the physical presence of humans that have access to joy. And so I really talk to school staffs about really creating that. You don't have to like each other. You will likely come, particularly if there's a bimodal distribution of really young teachers and really old teachers, whatever that looks like, older, wiser, we'll use.
Seasoned.
Yes. And so philosophical practices can change. I don't want you to all be the same. The deal is, how do we come together to repair our differences when they happen, not if, so that we can agree to disagree in some things, or we can talk about kids and in an open way and be like, okay, in your class, this is how it's going to go. I got it. And when they transition to me, let's give this a try. Okay. And let's really be clear that the expectations of us two humans can be different. And so when we talk about that, this is the most important lesson we have for kids. And I often tell the story about a teacher that I asked once when I was giving a talk. I was asking her, why did you become a teacher? And she was in her 60s. And she said, I just have to tell you, I was in 3 foster homes by the time I was 8 years old. And school was the only place where I heard laughter, where I heard adults being kind to each other. So I would come to school every day early so I could stand outside the staff room. And she said, I'm so old that this was the days where you'd open the staff room doors and like smoke would billow out. And they're like probably in there shooting scotch and stuff. But she said it was the best part because she knew she was going to be a teacher, because she wanted to create that sense of family. And I love that you don't know who's watching. And in this very attuned age, this anxiety riddled situation that we're stepping into in this season, babies can pick up. If you hate this shit, they'll know it from the parking lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? We have unpacked Earth and these core values and the root behind how we deal with the adversity and face it. We've talked about the adversity that we face, and we're tiptoeing the line of the water element, which is how we implement change. So, Jody, how have you driven meaningful change in the realm of mental health and leadership? And what's been the most rewarding outcome for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that I often talk about 3 things as a priority, okay? You, your teams, and then the kids and families you serve, in that order, okay? So if we're thinking about driving change, it really is that sort of reworking the model to not be in a place of self-care, because I think we've really attempted to buy into this rhetoric of big people are important. But I think that we've really missed the mark when we even assign a mental health day or tell everybody to take a bubble bath, right? You can drink all of the kale and do all the yoga. If you're doing that in a dysregulated body, it is a waste of time. So how are we truly teaching the importance of mental wellness for big people? How are we looking after our teachers? What are we doing? And I asked this to many boards and districts across North America. When you look at the amount of dollars that goes to investing in your students, okay, great. You can tell me about all these things. They've got this program and everybody got a Chromebook and other things. And I say, okay, so what are you doing for your teachers? And they'll be like, we have a potluck every second month. Holy shit. Nope. Nothing says you matter. Bring your own food. Okay. So there really needs to be a reshaping of how we acknowledge the hard work that's fixing to come, because this job of education is only going to get harder in this very disconnected world. Okay. And I often tell educators that, not because I want you to get out. As a mother, I hope there's a double down investment in this world of education, because teachers need to know how holy their work is right now. You are woven into the trajectory of so many kids' stories just by showing up. I asked our kids, it's August here when we're taping this, and I was like, okay, we're heading back into the classroom pretty soon. Tell me who your favorite teacher is. And our twins, who are 11, both said, they put up their hands because you people taught them how to do that. And they said, Mr. Seeley, together. And I said, what do you mean, Mr. Seeley? He taught you like in grade 3. You're like going into grade 6. And they're like, you want to know why he was our favorite, Mom? Because he had a turtle. That's it. The bar is low. You don't even have to be great. Just get a fish. And suddenly you're everybody's favorite. The idea is so much about, how do we find joy? How do we regulate and create safe places for kids so that they want to learn? And I think that it is far less difficult because so many of us are not anxious or depressed or have ADHD or all the things that we're trying to figure out what's wrong here. We're lonely. And as humans who once very deeply, or maybe still do, care for children, when I just tell you these babies are lonely, it becomes so much easier to be like, okay, put me in. You want me just to meet them in the hallway and high five them and be in the bus lane? Yes. Is that going to be enough? Yes.
Yeah. And a shout out to Mr. Seeley, because what he did was create a safe space.
Oh,
The turtle,
he's a remarkable
right?
human.
Absolutely. The turtle is creating an environment where people start to feel comfortable. It doesn't need to be a turtle. Like you said, it could be a fish. It could be whatever the heck you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't just work with educators, though. You work with diverse groups all around. How do you change your process as you work with different groups?
Good question. I don't. It's a universal message. And I say this quite often. I talk to farmers and police officers and Fortune 500 companies and then people in the local legion. I use the exact same slide deck. The only thing that changes for reference is stories and aligning with the people in the room and the work that they do, understanding their process so that they feel seen when we're having a conversation. But the same rules apply. You can't address what you don't acknowledge. That it is really about acknowledgement, and that if you're not okay, the people that you engage with, you're leading, you're loving, you're caring for, you're teaching, they don't stand a chance. It's the same story across the board.
It's so true. People are people are people.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of all of the speaking you do, the consulting you do, you have your own podcast, and season 1's just wrapped up. Everyone comes from somewhere, and you have multiple books out that are all like, everything you're doing is creating such a significant impact. What were your aspirations in the podcast and the books? What were you trying to achieve?
The purpose is to create a community. So at the beginning of this conversation, when we were talking about Earth, talking about having a safe place to land, to reset, for me has been the most important, the number one thing. To always know that I have a place to land in my family system, in my marriage, and whatever that looks like, in my business partnership with Marty. There's so many safety nets. And I think right now, when we think about a lonely world, Marty and I have a major commitment to creating a sense of community where people can land when they feel like kids are too much, their parents are too much. For police officers, how do we advocate for that very important profession? And I think that has been the goal. And then to create that place and create a trust in humans where I can be a voice for and have conversations globally around mental health and what it means to reconnect.
Now, you mentioned this right before we pressed record, but season 2 of your podcast is going to look a little different. And I'm hoping you can maybe share that teaser with everybody, but I more so want to know why the shift.
Great question. So the first season, we really just dipped our toe into this world of podcasting because there was lots of conversation. Through COVID, I started by chance. I would do like a Sunday night live. And so I'd get on Facebook. You remember back, 6 years ago, you could do lives on Facebook. Okay. And then Instagram came. And so I would do Sunday nights for a half an hour. I would just chat about a mental health issue where I'd be like, oh my gosh, how are we doing? Just in an effort to create a community. Okay. I had 3 followers in the beginning and we were just going to talk about things. And then COVID hit and everybody was at home. So we as a team were like, how can we create this sense of community when everybody feels so disconnected? So every morning at 7:30, I got on a live and our kids were trying to get organized. My husband and I are yelling at each other, but we would have coffee with whoever in the community would show up. So we did this every morning at 7:30, and we created an incredible group of humans that came together in a community. And some mornings we would have 3,000 people having coffee together. And we did that all the way through COVID. And so there was, I don't know, we even lost count, but 400 of those experiences. And then when we got back on our feet and we were traveling again, we stopped doing those things. And the ask has always been, can you please do more of that? And so we turned that into a podcast with the focus of really demonstrating in this first season that people are hard to hate close up. So we called it Everyone Comes. Learn about really interesting stories that maybe our community have questions about but never will ask. What does it mean to be a transgender man? What does it mean to grow up when you are, I don't know, Indigenous? What is the hardest part about being a Black woman? How do we understand all of these stories? Okay. If your kid you've lost a child to cancer, what does that mean? So it was just such a fantastic season. We met so many cool people. And as we've created a place to talk more about issues, and I get to have a place at important tables, like in government conversations with national police forces, speaking globally around what do we do with mental health, I really wanted to create the second season where we brought in experts that really could contribute to this understanding of how do we become unlonely. What is the answer to reconnecting in a disconnected world? And so we've called it Unlonely. We're going to put an episode every other week, and we're just garnering guests that really, I think, have the answer. And so I'm going to pull them all together, get the best I can from each of them, and hopefully at the end of the season, we'll have something ready, like maybe the next book.
There we go. I love that. And alchemists, if you're listening to this, I hope you're getting one thing very important from this, and that is change is constant, and change is the only constant that's really in our lives. And what you're noticing from this story of Jody here is change doesn't have to be scary. Change can be fun. And when change is rooted in your value of wanting to make an impact, wanting to support people, wanting to build a community, wanting to create spaces of safety and comfort amongst us, then seeking out change is not that hard. And that brings us to the fun part of the fire element and risk taking and making these decisions that we make. So, Jody, what has been one of the riskiest decisions you've made in your career?
I would say saying no to shiny opportunities that don't align. I think that there's certain things in the beginning where you are like, yep, let's try it, let's try it, let's try it. But I think being very clear on what you stand for, if you're doing things that are just not, the way they are because this isn't cool or they don't align. We've said no to some pretty big opportunities that didn't fit for us. And I think I always wondered, will people keep calling? Oh my God, we pissed off this entire group of US educators because we said no to this or whatever this is, but it just didn't fit. And if Marty and I walk away and feel good about it, I know we're going to be okay. And I think sometimes it's having, in fact, probably the most important conversations are the ones that are difficult to have.
Absolutely. And I love that you just took my fire element and rooted it back to your earth and said it needs to align with your values. One of the biggest values people can set is establish your non-negotiables. Determine where you draw your line, what you're not willing to do, and never compromise on that line either. Now, speaking of a risk within, though, launching Carrington and Company and stepping onto global stages as a speaker, that's a big risk in its own. And that comes with a lot of nerves, anxiety, but also hopefully hope and passion and excitement. What motivated this decision and how did it end up shaping your professional journey?
Another great question. I would say so much of this, to be honest with you, Tyler, feels completely out of, this is so much bigger than me. And so I've really been put in a position of privilege to be able to talk about things. I have a sense of humor and how I find it easy most days to be able to take really complicated issues and make them make sense. And so sometimes you think about being a teacher and you just can get the class. Many days I feel at home on a stage. I feel like I can write things very clearly. And so I'm just doing my very best to use those things. And it has been such a fun ride. We have just met the most incredible people. We've got to travel the world. And I cannot imagine being anywhere else. The hardest thing about it is navigating my kids, my marriage. Marty also has 3 kids and a husband. And so as we try to figure out in this first generation of the role of a woman or a female that is supposed to be navigating all these things at the same time. So the guilt is the biggest issue that often is on our shoulders, I would say. But I feel uncompromisingly every single day that it's worth it.
I love hearing that. And for people listening, for leaders listening, what advice are you giving in helping people step out of their comfort? Because really, when we talk about risks, you have your box of comfort. And to take a step out expands your box. And then to take a step out expands your box. And eventually you get this massive box where you feel comfortable. How do we get there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really rings true to me quite often is what you permit, you promote. So that's a James Clear quote. And I think that it's easy to go along with the status quo and try to keep everybody happy. Everybody's making racist jokes. So you don't want to really, we used to be colleagues. And so now I'm your leader, but it's okay. You can be late for the meeting. Bullshit. What you permit, you promote. And so it becomes really difficult, particularly when you have a good friendship in some of our smaller schools, or Marty and I talk about this all the time, right? Like, I am grateful that we are good friends. Our agent, our creative director, our marketing director, we're all connected in some way, but we've lost a lot of relationships along the way because either we outgrow them, they outgrow us, whatever that looks like. And to the best of our capacity, we've tried to stay very connected with all of them. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes it happens beautifully. But if I can stay in alignment with the message, and if I can go home to the people that I love the most and know that all of this is in alignment, that's the only thing that matters.
And that's a testament to some leadership theories around if you want to maintain where you're at, make sure you're hiring internally. And if you want change to come out, make sure you're hiring externally. There's a whole world to unpack with that. And some of the most difficult transitions is from a teacher to become a principal in their own building, or for somebody to grow up where they went to school and then become a teacher in that school. Those are difficult moments to bring in. So I love that you speak to that. Now, this is a big question. What are you hoping people action in their lives tomorrow from your message?
All I need you to do, and I would ask this of my children, of my husband, of myself, is all we need is the next best right kind thing. That's it. On any given day, what you have is going to be more than enough. So if it's a Friday and you feel like you got the shit kicked out of you, all I need you to do is give me your best that day. If it is giving a kid a compliment, if it's waving at somebody, your neighbors, you leave for work that morning. If the next day you're on it and you're like, you're going to do a Harry Potter themed lesson with a light show and snacks, amazing. But just know that the bottom line is people just need to feel seen. They don't care. We don't remember much else. And I think the intention there is to take the weight off. Just give us the best you can with what you got on any given day. Next best right kind thing. That's it.
Next best right kind thing. I love that. Jody, you're in Michigan right now, but what does your future look like?
Oh my God, so bright and shiny and universally important. We have so many exciting things coming up. We're doing a lot more in the US, which is our goal. We had Operation Expand in Canada. So we spoke in every province in Canada. And now we're into the US a lot more. Our job, I think, on the horizon is to launch the next podcast, write the next book, and really, I think, get across the pond.
As a former Yellowknifer, though, I got to say, you need to get up to the territories.
We did. I can't say every territory because I only spoke virtually to Iqaluit. Is that right? Which one did we not touch?
Yeah.
To Nunavut, sorry. So we were in Yellowknife. We've been in Whitehorse. Yeah, Nunavut is the place. So you were in Yellowknife. Did you teach up there?
No, I grew up there from 2 to 18.
Wow! Yellowknife to Dewberry.
Yeah, Yellowknife to Olds to Lethbridge to Okotoks to Calgary to Maidstone to Dewberry. So we toured the province and a little bit more.
Yes, you did. Was somebody in the military? Why did all of this happen?
Oh my gosh, this is a story and a half. And I'll clip this part out because this is my story. But grew up in Yellowknife and I was actually a tennis coach. I was a semi-pro tennis player and thought I'm going to become a police officer, but I want to go play volleyball at a college, and got a scholarship to Olds and realized, I'm not going to play professional. So I said, where can I get a job and go to school? And Lethbridge hired me to be their head tennis pro. So I went there and went to university and thought, I'm going to do a Bachelor of Science and get into physiotherapy or nursing because it sounds like a sweet gig. And I hated it. I hated it so much. And I went back to Yellowknife to visit my family, and a boy came up to me. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was 19. But he said, I was in your summer camp tennis lessons growing up, and you're the reason that I got off of drugs and into sports and kept me out of prison. So thank you. And that really stuck with me. And I said, I need to do that for the rest of my life on the biggest scale I can do. And so that, lo and behold, I got into education because I thought I can start impacting classroom after classroom. And then thought, if I become an admin, I can impact school and maybe after school. And that's where the whole idea of the book and everything came from, was what's the biggest way that you can push that out there so you steer people on the right paths and you help guide them to the journey of finding who they are and what they want to become.
Amazing. Don't you dare cut that out. That's the whole thing. That's how it all comes together, right? Like I really love that, right? That's why we can give our whole heart and soul when you are really clear that the journey leads you to where you're supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Good deal.
So Jody, I have to ask, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
I would love your people to be a part of our community. And I put out a newsletter, so I will drop into your email once a month. And everything else that you need is on drjodycarrington.com.
And Alchemists, in the description of this episode, you'll find the links to all of Dr. Jody Carrington's social media, website, and newsletter to be a part of. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. I'm Tyler, your host of the Elemental Educator podcast. It has been my absolute pleasure to sit down with Dr. Jody Carrington. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day in Michigan to have a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on the Elemental Educator.